Welcome back, kitties. I'm Ginger, and this is my first episode without the mask. I'm going to keep it on for my short form content on Instagram and stuff, but I'm going to leave it off for long form videos. My Jake Shields interview on the Fight Back podcast dropped on Saturday. It was a cool experience. Him and his team were nice, and that was actually my first ever podcast. And I wasn't even planning to be on that one. It was just kind of a last minute thing while I was in town. And then the next day I filmed with Sean Kelly. The Sean Kelly Digital Social Hour podcast interview should be out by the time that I'm posting this. But I'll let you guys know through my stories because I believe it's supposed to drop on March 10th, which is today when I record this. So a little update there. And today we're going to be covering a few topics. It's been a very news-heavy week, as we all know. We're going to talk about the blackouts in Cuba, some Middle East updates, Secretary Noem being replaced, and the FIFA World Cup situation. I'm sure we'll go down some branch topics as well. I have talked my shit for months in short-form videos, but maybe I should do a long-form series on Trump's entire administration, starting with his henchwomen, Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem, and Caroline Leavitt. Now to Cuba. So the U.S. took out President Maduro of Venezuela for narco-trafficking reasons. Nope. Does anyone actually think that these billionaires running our country give a single damn about narco-trafficking? They regularly profit off of it. Trump has personally doted on the Sackler family, and he pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, which was the former president of Honduras, who was convicted in 2024 for importing at least 400 tons of cocaine into the United States, and he was sentenced to 45 years in prison. And that was state-sponsored drug trafficking. It involved the military, the police, the government, and the cartels. On December 1st, 2025, President Trump gave Hernandez a full pardon. This was just days after Trump endorsed Nasri Esfera as president-elect of Honduras. Juan Hernandez was a member of Nasri Esfera's political party. While Hernandez was president of Honduras in 2021, he opened an embassy in Jerusalem, of course. Esfera, who is also pro-Israel, faced scrutiny over Hernandez's actions with the cocaine operation, which most likely contributed to Hernandez's pardon so that Esfera could secure the presidency. You might be surprised to learn that Nasri Esfera is the grandson of supposed Palestinian Christian immigrants. He's a traitor to not just the people of Honduras, but his own alleged bloodline. Unless, of course, they weren't Palestinian Christians and just posing as that. Who really knows? Esfera, of course, has been strengthening ties with Israel and made it a key priority following his election victory in 2025. He visited Israel on January 17th, 2026, before he was even inaugurated as president. So now you know why President Trump said that Esfera was the only president-elect of Honduras that the U.S. would work with. Side note on that, when talking about the pardoning of Hernandez, the drug trafficker, Trump said, and I quote, "They basically said he was a drug dealer because he was president of the country." That is exactly what Trump did with Nicolas Maduro. Do you see how the rules are always perverted and bent depending on who they want them to apply to? If there's one thing that Trump and all politicians are, it's indisputably a liar. They're liars. So, back to the overthrow of Maduro, Venezuela had recently nationalized their oil, and that means that it went directly toward the nation's own economy and people first. Usually when countries do this, nationalize their resources, they're subject to a coup by the United States. I mentioned in the previous episode how this also happened in Iran when Mossadegh became prime minister in 1951. He had nationalized Iran's oil industry, which had been controlled by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which later became BP, British Petroleum. Now, because he nationalized their oil, the US and UK orchestrated the 1953 coup, Operation Ajax and Operation Boot, and these overthrew Mossadegh and installed the CIA-trained Shah Pahlavi. In 1954, a Western multinational consortium led by BP, British Petroleum, took over Iranian oil development. And there was no further talk of nationalization as the Shah firmly and militarily suppressed political dissent. And Iran basically turned into a police state. What do you mean you want to enrich your own country? Are you crazy? You're going to jail. Pahlavi was overthrown in 1979 because he was a dictator who militarized the country against his own people and silenced opposition. Similarly to Venezuela, Mexico nationalized its oil industry and revoked U.S. oil concessions in 1938. The U.S. didn't perform a coup due to Roosevelt's Good Neighbor policy of 1933, which basically promised a less interventionist policy toward Latin American countries. So, oil companies pushed the U.S. government to intervene, and the U.S. enacted economic sanctions and embargoes against Mexico. These actions then led to Germany being Mexico's primary oil customer, and this was during World War II. But then, in 1943, Mexico agreed to basically play nice with the oil companies while maintaining their national oil company as a state monopoly. Similar things happened with Libya under Gaddafi because they were actually planning a Pan-African gold-backed currency to bypass the dollar. The U.S. said, immediately no. I'm seeing what I needed to see, immediately no.
Because I don't care.
Yeah, immediately no. Immediately.
And the U.S. did the same to Guatemala for land, Chile for their socialist economy, the Congo for resource sovereignty, Iraq for oil nationalization, the petrodollar, and for being a powerful Arab nationalist state who was one of Israel's most vocal and militarily capable enemies. There have been many other coups orchestrated by the U.S. And its partners for similar reasons. And that's not to say that any of those governments were great. I'm just saying this is the U.S.'s role. So Venezuela has obviously the largest oil reserves in the Americas and gold. So yes, we overthrew Maduro for their resources. They had to secure this oil because tensions had been heightening between Israel, U.S., and the major Middle East suppliers. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Libya. This also means that the U.S. has been preparing for a war or heightened tensions with the Middle East for a while now. It's not fair that Israel can't play nice with their neighbors, and so our government then has to get their hands dirty and do Israel's dirty work. But whatever, I guess. So oil trading firms Vitol and Trafigura were temporarily selling all Venezuelan oil on the open market under U.S. oversight. And those proceeds were routed through an account in Qatar. Washington then selectively eased sanctions, which redirected Venezuelan oil to allies like the United States and Israel, while reducing flow to China and Russia, which were Venezuela's former allies. And the oil being sent to Israel was the first time that Venezuela had sent oil to them since at least 2020, although their relations with Israel were scratched in 2009 with Hugo Chavez. Venezuela was a more modern coup, and as we go on, we'll probably see more modern coups like this, which is they fit two criteria. They're anti-U.S. economic dominance, which includes the IMF, and they're anti-Israel. Because now the U.S.'s trade policy, foreign policy, and every other policy has to always directly benefit Israel for some reason now. So fast forward to today, Cuba's president, Miguel Diaz-Canel, has been strongly critical of Israel, including condemning its actions in Gaza, calling it a genocide, and referring to Israel as a terrorist state. He has personally led pro-Palestine marches in Havana, including one in front of the U.S. Embassy. Now, I know some people might see that and think, oh, he's kind of slay, like he might be a good leader. Nothing of the sort. That is actually performative activism. Cuba has been ruled by a military oligarchy that hoards resources and starves Cubans. This economic model started under Raul Castro, Fidel Castro's brother, when he was in the military. And the average Cuban salary is around $15 per month, which is obviously not a livable wage. They have free healthcare and education, but the teachers, doctors, lawyers, etc., hardly make enough money to survive. So many of them turn to the tourism industry instead, which the military conglomerate owns as well. Sometimes Cuba exchanges their trained doctors, who are mostly sent to Western schools to train. They'll exchange them with other countries for resources and aid. So the United States and Cuba have had a complex relationship. We used to be cool in the 19th century. We would facilitate trade between the two countries, as Cuba was the sugar bowl. And the U.S. helped Cuba gain independence from Spain in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. And between then and 1959, the U.S. basically had economic dominance in Cuba. The U.S.-backed leader, Fulgencio Batista, was overthrown in 1959. And that's when Fidel Castro rose to power and then established a socialist government. Cuba then nationalized the businesses that were privatized and U.S. owned and forced those entities to basically help and or support the Cuban economy and people instead of just the U.S. Cuba also aligned with the Soviet Union, and so the U.S. severed diplomatic ties in 1961 and, of course, imposed an extensive trade embargo that is still in place to this day. The U.S. tried to overthrow Castro with the Bay of Pigs invasion, which is interesting because the CIA trained at least 1,500 Cuban exiles and transported them into Cuba in order to attempt an overthrow of Castro. I wonder if that's what happened in Iran as well. The U.S. government confirmed that there were CIA operations taking place in Iran and have repeatedly called for the Iranians to overthrow their government. Now, I'm not saying that the Iranians don't have a right to be mad at their government. I'm just saying that the U.S. facilitates a lot of things that people aren't aware of. So, fast forward to today. We're at war with Iran, and the People's Princess, Lindsey Graham, the gay traitor, who has repeatedly called for the murder of Palestinian children. I don't think there's anything else notable about him. That pretty much sums it up. So, on March 2nd, 2026, after the bombing of Iran, during a Fox News interview, Lindsey Graham said, "Cuba is next, they're gonna fall." Every time I hear him speak, he reminds me of Wilbur from Charlotte's Web. Like, he sounds like that little pig. Every time I hear him and see him, that is exactly what comes to mind. So, imagine the spider is Netanyahu, and he's drawing on the web what it wants Lindsey Graham to say. Now, I understand that, obviously because of propaganda, like the things that Lindsey Graham is putting out there, a lot of people think that the U.S. intervenes in countries, including Cuba, because of socialism, communism, terrorism, or human rights, when that's not the reality at all. The real reasons are always access to resources, geopolitical alignment in foreign policy, and access to markets. I mean, if they really cared about human rights, they wouldn't have done anything that has taken place in Gaza in the past 2 years, or even the plethora of war crimes before that. They don't care. Cuba resists the idea of U.S. supremacy in their country. Now, I'm not saying their government is slack, because it is very bad. Although I know a lot of people will take it that way because people just want to argue and play into the simple-minded two-choice false dichotomy, which isn't just left and right. It's the same mindset where if you disagree or critique a certain side of an issue, it automatically means you think the opposite. No, I am outside of the realm of two-choice dichotomy. I'm zoomed out. I'm on the side of reality. Everybody needs to zoom out. So after overthrowing Venezuela, the U.S. declared an oil blockade on oil exports from Venezuela to Cuba. Venezuela supplied 50% of Cuba's oil deficit, which is the gap between a country's total oil demand and its domestic oil production. So that means that Cuba produces about 40,000 barrels per day of oil while consuming around 100,000 barrels per day. That means that their deficit is 60,000 barrels, and Venezuela was sending them between 30 and 35,000 barrels. And it's just interesting to note that Cuba exchanges medical and security services with Venezuela for that oil, which is most likely why 32 Cuban security officers were killed by the U.S. during the invasion and capture of Maduro. After Venezuela, Mexico was one of the only remaining oil suppliers to Cuba, and they too stopped shipments due to sanctions pretty much. Trump signed Executive Order 14380, which imposed tariffs on any country that directly or indirectly supplied oil to Cuba. It's now estimated that Cuba will run out of fuel by the end of March, although Russia has recently promised to start sending aid to Cuba to help alleviate their humanitarian and energy crisis. So when you suddenly stop pretty much all exports of oil to Cuba, which provides upwards of 80% of its total energy and 95% of its electricity, that means that it's relying on its very low production per day, which is around 40,000 barrels. This causes extreme 20-hour blackouts. Hospitals lose power, which means that a lot of people die. Ventilators can't work. Medicine can't be refrigerated. Babies who need incubators cannot survive this. Surgeries can't be performed. Just think about everything that relies on electricity. The water pumps in Cuba are electrically pumped, which means that there's hardly any clean water. When there's no clean water, people have to turn to alternative sources, and that in turn causes diseases to run rampant. But there are no functioning hospitals to help. Ambulances aren't even operable because they rely on fuel. The greatest catastrophe is the collapse of the food supply. 20-hour blackouts means that electricity is funneled toward only the most essential things and billionaires. Well, there are no billionaires in Cuba, but you know what I'm saying. And it's just not enough to sustain the population of 11 million people. Do you know who gets hit the hardest when the food supply is sabotaged? Children and the elderly. Now, I've heard different things about the tourism sector right now. I've heard that, they've got all their lights on and the rich people are fine. And I would definitely believe that. I haven't heard concrete evidence. I don't know, but just keep that in mind. It's very hard to determine what it's like on the ground there because of the media blackouts due to the electricity blackouts. Also, they were facing electricity blackouts all the way back in 2024 as well because their power plant had routinely failed. Although this is different because this is more of an energy issue, a supply chain issue, because there is no oil. So the horrors happening right now in Cuba are pretty much due to prior American influence, which shaped their current government. Although, yes, they have a military entity that does not help their people at all and, promotes communism among the rich who rule it and not the people. But America is the reason why that government exists today. Now, the horrors happening in Cuba are not unique, unfortunately. The U.S. did the same to Venezuela, Gaza, and Iraq in the 90s. The worst humanitarian crisis on Earth is in Yemen, and the Saudi blockade, which blocks all aid, food, medicine, everything, is U.S. backed. So getting into the Middle East and what the hell's going on there, we are now 11 days into the regime change war on Iran. As of March 8th, the Ayatollah's son has been appointed as Iran's new supreme leader after being voted on by the Iranians' Assembly of Experts. Also, don't forget, Trump and Marco Rubio have both vocally stated that they only joined the war because Israel forced our hand. America has zero reason to be in this war apart from holding Israel's little hand, since it can't ever stand on its own and needs Big Daddy Trump to come and save them every single day. Israel has also drastically depleted U.S. weaponry in the region, which is millions and millions of dollars absolutely wasted on Israeli interests. No matter how much money they illegally siphon out of this country, it's never enough. On top of the $4 billion that we illegally shovel out to Israel every year, on March 6th, the Trump administration bypassed Congress and approved yet another $660 million emergency arms sale, which included over 27,000 bombs. And I say yet another because we gave them that same amount in February of last year. So, for this sale, the State Department announced the sale on March 7th and invoked emergency authority under the Arms Export Control Act. Once again, every single individual who approved and or participated in that sale has basically committed treason. They are blatantly disregarding federal law that states we cannot, under any circumstance, give military or any aid to Israel due to their nuclear ambiguity policy. And that is literally contained within the Arms Export Control Act as well. I mean, Israel has killed thousands of Americans, and America has objectively zero reason to want anything to do with Israel, which is obvious that the people who are in the government supporting this relationship are traitors, acting on behalf of a foreign government to the detriment of their own people. And once again, that is treason. And this didn't start with Trump's administration, although I think people have been exposed more to it because of his actions, but it's been going on for decades. So Israel has perpetrated multiple false flag attacks in general, but Iran is saying in the region, which is actually their specialty, if you know how they go about warfare. Iran says that Israel is behind the bombings of the Gulf energy infrastructure and oil refineries and not Iran, because Israel is trying to turn the other Arab states against Iran so that they have no allies. Because of the Strait of Hormuz being closed during this conflict, 20% of the world's global oil supply has been removed from markets. The Brent crude oil price has surged to over 110, although I think it's dropped. So on March 9th, U.S. crude oil apparently fell to around 86 per barrel, and the Brent crude fell to around 90 per barrel, which is still very high. They're usually between 65 and 70, and that's why we're seeing rising gas prices. And honestly, they're censoring the real oil prices. So we don't actually know. They could be over 120, honestly. We don't know. I assume they're still around 110. I think it's set to surpass Biden's record of 120 per barrel during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, although we'll see. At the same time as all of this Iranian, Israeli, U.S. war that's going on, Afghanistan and Pakistan are also at war. They've been exchanging airstrikes, which started on February 21st, with Pakistani Air Force launching airstrikes. Pakistan claims that Taliban agents performed terrorism prior to this airstrike, and that's why they carried out the military operation. Pakistan currently has a Taliban problem, although they did enable and help them for years on end and give them safe harbor during the U.S.-Iraq-Afghanistan war. It's when the Taliban took power after the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan in 2021 that the two countries strained. Pakistan claims that TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban, a faction of the group, has been carried out an increasing number of attacks in Pakistan since they assumed power in 2021. Usually something like this could end with a round of peace talks and agreements, but the countries who usually serve as mediators for these types of conflicts are caught up in the war with Iran, Saudi Arabia and Qatar being two of the main ones. Qatar is always catching strays from Israel too. They want to blame everything on Qatar. It's kind of funny, especially when Pam Bondi was a registered FARA agent, a paid lobbyist for Qatar for years on end. And Trump received a $400 million jet from Qatar after assuming office last year, which usually is illegal under the Constitution for presidents to accept emoluments, which is basically a gift, a bribe, etc., from other countries while serving. But Pam Bondi signed off on it. I'm sure there's nothing there. Also, this is not related, but I do want to mention that Hakeem Jeffries, although he has no charisma and nobody really knows who he is, I think he's being positioned to be some kind of Democratic nominee for 2028, among others. He rallied media attention around the War Powers Resolution that failed this past Thursday, but make no mistake, he is bought and paid for by the Zionist supremacist regime. He has taken many AIPAC-funded trips to Israel. He's taken millions. He's a staunch supporter for U.S.-Israeli relations. He advocates for U.S. support to Israel despite it being against federal law. And he has equated criticism of Israeli policies with anti-Semitism. Don't vote for people just because they surface level pretend to represent the opposite of what you despise. I just had to bring that up because it had to do with the War Powers Resolution. Now, things in the Middle East and Southern Asia are escalating. All we can do at this point is predict and then wait and see what will happen. The U.S. is murdering civilians on Israel's behalf. And I know everyone saw the acid or oil rain that was raining down in Tehran. This is evil. And this is wrong. And I condemn the actions of my government wholeheartedly. The vast majority of Americans, I feel, are not okay with this war. We're being dragged into yet another unnecessary forever war on behalf of Israel. American troops are being deployed to Iran. I believe they're sending our troops to be slaughtered so that they can justify extreme military action. I don't know if a nuke would be used, but I can definitely see that happening. I hope it doesn't, but I do think that that is on the table. And I think that they will have some type of extreme American casualty event so that they can justify a weapon of mass destruction. Lots of new things happening every hour of the day. It's hard to keep up. Hillary and Kill Clinton testified about their possible involvement with the Epstein files. The Clintons have always been evil in my eyes. I'll never forget that Hillary defended a businessman over the rape of a 12-year-old girl. And in the process, which, you're a lawyer, whatever, but she chose to make insinuations that the 12-year-old girl was a whore and enticed a grown man into raping her. In Hillary's own words, the child was emotionally unstable and fantasized about older men. Hillary was a 27-year-old law professor at the time. Honorable mention is Hillary's relationship with the Podesta brothers. Tony Podesta is the guy who is obsessed with pedophile art. I'm sure that that's also just a coincidence. As George Carlin said, it's one big club and you're not in it. You can't even count the number of women that Bill Clinton had affairs with. I'm sure he lost count decades ago, as did Hillary. An honorable mention also would be the drug trafficking going on in Arkansas during Bill's time as governor in the 80s. This involved the murder of 2 teenage boys in order to conceal the trafficking that was allegedly tied to the CIA. I have to say allegedly about all of this, as these people have an uncanny way of making things disappear when they normally would have been prosecuted. Bill denies any wrongdoing, as does Hillary. That's no surprise. They don't think anyone expected them to admit to anything, did they? I mean, just deny, deny, deny. Bill and Hillary are both lawyers, after all. It's my opinion that Bill and Hillary are evil, habitual liars who serve the same master that all these politicians and one-percenters do. I believe they are both playing roles and are participating in the Epstein cover-up. And that is my opinion. I'm allowed to have that. So, Pam Bondi has been subpoenaed again to testify about her handling, or rather mishandling, of the Epstein case. I obviously despise Pamela Jo Bondi. It's not a matter of opinion that she has broken countless laws while in position as Attorney General. It's a matter of factual reality, and I will not be surprised if she gets pardoned by Trump before he leaves office, because they're all eligible for prison if they don't get pardoned. I do not like Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem, or Caroline Leavitt, as those women are using Christianity as a weapon to garner support for this administration's actions. That is heresy, that is blasphemous, and they're doing it on purpose. All of this was a carefully crafted psychological operation to gain support and evangelize conservatives and Christians for this administration. And yes, this applies to everyone in the admin, not just the women. I'm giving an honorable mention to them because they lead and or led their departments and work to brainwash women, which is one of the most important groups to capture support from. And obviously the religious individuals in this country, if they see a cross on your neck, they're automatically going to be like, oh yeah, you're on my side. PSYOP. Also, having 3 women in your cabinet as figureheads made other women believe that Trump wasn't a predator. Sometimes the PSYOPs are 2-for-1s, 3-for-1s, sometimes they're even 10-for-1s. Now, Kristi Noem was reported to have been removed from her position for saying that Trump approved her $220 million ad campaign. That's what the headline was, although that's not the full reason. That ad campaign cost more to make than The Matrix, Iron Man, Oppenheimer, and Top Gun Maverick, to name a few. $143 million of this allotment was given to a recently incorporated company, which was personally connected to Noem. So, in other words, she allegedly stole at least $143 million in taxpayer money. Did she get fired for this? No, actually. She was quietly moved to another position where she can keep, allegedly, embezzling and not serving the American people. When Kristi Noem was on the stand, she was asked about her relationship with DHS staffer Corey Lewandowski. Representative Dove and Representative Moskowitz asked her if she had ever had sexual relationships with Corey. She refused to answer and instead called this tabloid garbage. That is a deflection. You saw this same tactic deployed during Pam Bondi's entire hearing. This is done so that they do not commit perjury on the stand and self-incriminate. Noem refused to simply say no when asked to clarify for the record. If she had said no and people were able to prove otherwise, she could then be prosecuted for perjury, aka lying on the stand under oath. Noem refusing to answer the affair question under oath was reported to be a major factor in why Trump removed her from her position. Corey Lewandowski was also removed from the Department of Homeland Security days after Noem was. So, yeah, it was a $220 million ad campaign, but it was a lot of different scandals. Noem and Lewandowski's relationship has been described by multiple sources as one of Washington's worst kept secret. They were reportedly even dating. Kristi Noem is a married mother and grandmother. By the way, her husband was sitting behind her during her hearings. And for one of these Corey questions, he wasn't in the room, but they were asking questions like, why was Corey seen taking trash out at your residence? So, who is Corey Lewandowski? Well, first of all, he's a married father of 4. I hope Miss Allison divorces him. By the way, she is the widow of someone who died in 9/11. Corey Lewandowski was the senior advisor to Noem at DHS. He was an unpaid special government employee. That's also the same title that Jared Kushner holds. They're unpaid positions, but they are special advisors. So as an unpaid government employee, he is allowed and encouraged to have a job outside of his government work. He has refused to disclose whether he is being paid by outside companies, which most likely means yes. He is, in fact, being paid by private entities with special interests. Since he's not paid with taxpayer funds, Corey has virtually zero accountability, financial disclosure requirements, and somehow has the power to fire Senate-confirmed officials, despite not even being confirmed himself. In his role at the DHS, he personally approved billions in contracts, despite Senator Blumenthal asking Noem whether he had a role in approving contracts during her hearing. She said no. She lied under oath. Internal DHS records contradict her statement. Not that it matters in 2026, but it's a federal crime to knowingly and willfully make a false statement to Congress. Corey also fired a FEMA employee at Noem's DHS desk. Some employees were also made to report indirectly to Lewandowski and not to the head of ICE. Neither of these things are in the realm of things that he is allowed to do as a special government unpaid employee. Clearly, there were not just unethical violations, but legal ones as well concerning his time there. Not to mention, he worked at the DHS for a full calendar year, despite special government employees only being allowed to spend 130 days max in their government roles per year. And this actually got so bad that the White House started personally tracking his timesheet logs. Why can't her boyfriend just go home? Is that her boyfriend or her handler? The jury's still out on that one. Corey has been in politics ever since he was in college. He was actually Donald Trump's first campaign manager in 2016. He was hired in 2015 and was just one of 3 people in Trump's initial political staff. He served as campaign manager for just a few months before being dismissed after clashes with other staff members. He has since floated around the Trump circle for years, even working as a propagandist for Trump on CNN. He was chairman of the super PAC Make America Great Again Action. He co-founded consulting firm Avenue Strategies with other Trump advisors, and that firm became one of the most powerful consulting outfits in Washington at the time. It was said to overlook the White House with a direct line to Trump at all times. Corey did not register as a lobbyist and received backlash for that. The government ethics group Public Citizen asked the DOJ to investigate whether he should have registered as a lobbyist. Corey Lewandowski left the company that he co-founded the very next day. Interesting. As we can see, his DHS position was only his most recent post under Trump. Here's a clip of Lewandowski on Fox News in 2018 if you'd like to know a bit more about this guy's personality.
I read today about a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome who was taken from her mother and put in a cage. I read about did you say want to a 10-year-old with Down syndrome being taken from her mother?
Lewandowski has not just been a consultant of Trump's, but also Netanyahu, of course. In 2019, he visited Israel and met with Prime Minister Benjamin Milikowski to offer strategic advice for his upcoming election campaign. Lewandowski has also been accused of sexually harassing women, one case being in 2017 that didn't result in charges, and another in 2021, which resulted in a battery charge, and his removal from his role as chairman of the MAGA PAC. Corey and Christie have allegedly been dating since at least 2019, if not earlier, when Noem became governor of South Dakota. By 2020, their relationship was described as an open secret at the White House. Once again, they were both married with children. Noem is a grandmother. In 2022, 2 Noem staffers said that they were instructed to keep her schedule private from her husband in an effort to hide her relationship with Lewandowski because he was all over her schedule. As I discussed in my recent short-form video, Christie was asked about the World Cup security issues at least twice during her hearings. Both of these conversations made it seem as though there hasn't been adequate funding or appropriation of funds, leading to a possible heightened security risk or threat environment. This seems intentional to set the stage for a possible terrorist attack / false flag event. To discuss the World Cup situation accurately, we will first start with the Board of Peace. The Board of Peace is an international organization that came to fruition during a ceremony at the yearly World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland this year. Apparently, it was created to usurp the UN, in Trump's own words. Despite this, the UN passed a resolution allowing the organization to be formed, although this agreement expires in 2027. Also, the US funds the UN. They don't really have a choice. The board was established to oversee post-war reconstruction and administration in Gaza. This was a part of Trump's 20-point plan for the Middle East. They plan to turn Gaza into a shiny, technocratic, authoritarian hellhole. Trump has appointed himself as chairman for life, so when Trump's presidency ends in 2029, he leaves the White House but retains chairmanship of a global governance organization. By the way, he pledged $10 billion of American money to that board for Gaza. Trump personally appointed the executive board, and countries can be a part of the Board of Peace, similar to a UN relationship, if they pay $1 billion and then they have lifetime membership. There are some countries who have signed on to it already, although it hasn't been confirmed whether they paid the $1 billion fee. Those countries are Albania, Argentina, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Hungary, El Salvador, Egypt, Cambodia, Bulgaria, Belarus, Indonesia, Israel, of course, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, Kuwait, Morocco, Mongolia, Pakistan, Paraguay, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the UAE, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. Under the Board of Peace is the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, which is by definition a technocratic billionaireocracy. And it has several stated goals, including overseeing the demilitarization and disarming of Hamas, which means that they will continue the destruction of Gaza and murder of civilians until there are actually zero left. Because remember, they say that everything that moves in Palestine is Hamas. If it's a little cat walking on the ground, that's Hamas. I mean, they also say that they're going to deploy the ISF, the International Stabilization Force, a multinational military force that will enforce peace and be called peacekeepers. Just sounds like a Gestapo or something like the Cheka police. And Cheka was majority Jewish and used to murder innocent Russians and Christians during the Bolshevik reign. I've gone into depth about the Bolsheviks as well because, of course, they're deeply entrenched with Jewish Freemasonry. This Board of Peace and Hell,
I asked Santa for Christmas, peace on the world.
Was masterminded by Jared Kushner and his business partner, Steve Witkoff. It's being carried out by Trump, all three Jewish billionaires who have contributed to the genocide in Gaza based on the ideology of Jewish supremacy, all with our U.S. tax dollars. I don't ever want to hear another paramecium brain utter the word, it's Zionism, not Judaism. Boy, aren't you naive. Zionism is just the most modern term for Jewish supremacy. Modern Judaism, which is factually theistic Satanism, is a culmination of Freemasonic, Talmudic, and rabbinical beliefs. I've made videos about this Jewish Freemasonry, which created the ADL as a militant arm to punish and label those who criticize those pretending to be Jews in any capacity. Read the Talmud and other rabbinic literature. Read about Jewish mysticism. These people do not go by the Torah. I have a book linked to my Linktree about the mysticism that I personally read. Read those and tell me that this is not devil worship. I'm really not having that argument anymore. You either know how to read and comprehend or you don't. Don't come at me in the comments talking about satanic panic. I've said it before and I'll say it again. In fact, I'll even make a video on it. Satanic panic was a cover for real satanic cults, and the media focused on frivolous things like teenagers listening to metal rather than the actual ritualistic murders, sex cults, and other real satanic things that were going on. I'm not talking about some dumb, lame teenagers pretending to like the devil because they think they're edgy. I'm talking about theistic Satanism, worshiping the literal devil as their god. Also, yes, Trump is most likely Jewish. Aside from admitting that he is the first Jewish president, Donald Trump's brother, Fred Trump, was in a Jewish fraternity. It is alleged that Fred said he only joined to piss off his dad, who was an anti-Semite. That's a flat-out lie, which was probably crafted in recent years to conceal their affiliation, but the truth about Fred Trump Sr., their father, is that he had extensive connections to the Jewish community, including funding a Jewish community center in Brooklyn for his lifelong Jewish friend, Rabbi Israel Wagner, who Fred Trump called my rabbi. He donated land in New York so that the Beach Haven Jewish Center could be built, and he helped finance the construction. Fred would sometimes attend synagogue, he would attend annual dinners, and make regular donations. He made significant donations to the Long Island Jewish Medical Center, purchased Israel bonds, and served as treasurer for an Israeli benefit concert in 1952. Fred Trump also had very close relationships with the Jewish mob, as did Donald when he grew up into his dad's shoes. Not to mention, Donald's grandfather, after immigrating to the United States, created his first business in America with a partner named Ernest Levin, a Russian Jew. Both sides of the family, going back to the original immigration, consistently embedded themselves in Jewish life, community, and business. And there's actually so much more to this. There's alleged evidence that both of Donald Trump's parents were Jewish, and I can make another video going into depth about that sometime because that's quite a bit of information, and I'm doing a bad job, but I'm trying to stay on the topic of FIFA. Also, like, these people who claim to be Jewish are not Jewish. There's something else. I don't know what they are. People say Khazarian, Canaanite. I'm not sure, really. But they're not Jewish in the biblical or Torah sense. These people have no connection at all to the ancient lineage of Judaism. So, yeah. Back to the Board of Peace and Hell. Jared Kushner is the demonic mind behind the vision for the entire Gaza reconstruction plan and probably the demolition plan as well. He was behind the Abraham Accords. He has been the chief of Trump's foreign policy for years now. Kushner has insinuated that Palestinians are incapable of self-governance and has been quoted saying that Gaza has very valuable waterfront property. He said that Gaza's GDP is 85% aid, and that's not sustainable. Notice how all of this language is sanitized to carefully never mention the fact that the colony of Isn't Real has destroyed the entire country and made it unlivable. And now the Palestinians are still being crucified for even needing or accepting aid when the whole reason they need it in the first place is because the Israelis and the billionaire class have murdered, raped, displaced, and imprisoned the Palestinians for the crime of living on their own land. Kushner is not a human in my eyes. He is a walking incarnation of a demon, as are all of the Board of Peace members and anyone who had anything to do with the destruction of Palestine and the genocide of the Palestinians. Jared Kushner is evil to his slimy little core. There's not a single redeeming quality about that anti-human monster who has done nothing but support the brutal genocide of an entire people. And I might seem mad, guys, but he encouraged the wicked murders of children, of human beings. These people act like Israel isn't raping men and children in prisons as a dehumanization ritual. This is evil, and every single thing about this is so inexplicably, undescribably evil. Evil doesn't even begin to cover what this is. You know, it makes sense Jared Kushner would support a genocide considering his own grandparents lied about their experiences in the Holocaust. It's just a whole family of liars, scammers, and thieves. I think if we're going to use AI, we should use it for benevolent reasons, like creating a digital prison for billionaires and their entire families. Imagine a simulated reality where all of them are placed in war-torn Gaza or another hellscape that they created, where they can never leave and have to try to survive. Every single time they die, they respawn and die another horrible, agonizing death over and over and over again for eternity. If they don't face that type of well-deserved retribution while on Earth, they certainly will when they're burning in the pits of hell. You will reap what you sow. And these individuals have sowed the most evil seeds. I can't even describe, like, I'm at a loss for words. I need to pick up my thesaurus because I can't even think about how evil, anti-human, anti-life these people are. So, where does FIFA, the Swiss organization, come into play with all of this? Well, one thing I want to say, when I was researching, FIFA was founded by Robert Guérin, who was married to a woman named Andrée Brunel. And I was like, Jean-Luc Brunel, duh. And they're all French. And I tried so hard to find the lineage of either Jean-Luc or Andrée, and it's missing. Andrée Brunel, this is a while ago. She was married to Robert in 1927. So I don't know how old she was when she was born or when she died. But Jean-Luc Brunel went by that name, and that wasn't even his legal name. And usually when people make up names, identities, that a lot of these people do, and they change their names, they usually or sometimes take the name from a maternal relative, their last name or their middle name. And so it just made me think of that. So yeah, I don't know. If anybody knows anything about those two lineages, please let me know, because I'm not saying they're related, but I'm saying it'd be pretty crazy if they were. So FIFA has a partnership with the Board of Peace. This entails FIFA investing at least $75 million toward building dozens of soccer fields, academies, and stadiums in Gaza, on top of the bodies of murdered Palestinian children and their parents and their pets. The U.S. has been ramping up a threat environment concerning the Middle East. There was an alleged terrorist attack that was to be acted out on New Year's Day in North Carolina. This was apparently foiled by law enforcement. The perpetrator was said to have been acting on behalf of ISIS. There's been a shooting in Austin, Texas by a Muslim man who allegedly had the Iranian flag in his home, although he was not from Iran. Two Muslim teenage boys from Pennsylvania, Amir Alat and Abraham Kayumi, were arrested for allegedly attempting to detonate homemade explosive devices during an anti-Muslim protest on March 7th, 2026. And this was outside the house of Zionist puppet Zoran Mamdani. Coincidentally, both of the teens said that they were inspired by ISIS, and allegedly said that they wanted to perform an attack bigger than the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing. Sure. Totally organic. Jake Lang, who is a Jewish Fed, has been leading anti-Muslim protests, LARPing as a white Christian nationalist. And then Laura Loomer, look at her Twitter, enough said. So you have these feds that are ramping up this ignorant hatred. He has been doing this for months. Other people like Valentina Gomez has been added to it as well. That woman's probably the dumbest human being alive. And she loves to rile up the Muslim hate as well. She's the one who's been burning Qurans and also cheering on the bombing of Palestinians. So with all of this, they're curating the threat environment. FIFA signed a deal with the Board of Peace, who has committed the atrocities in Gaza, in Palestine. And it would be a perfect narrative to say that a radical Muslim jihadist activated by the assassination of the Ayatollah and the attacks on Iran perpetrated a terrorist attack against the World Cup due to the war and or their partnership with the Board of Peace to build on top of the ruins and dead human beings in Gaza. When the U.S. and or Israel want to gain American support for war, they manufacture it with fear. They instill fear into Americans through propaganda, an increase in threats, foreign and domestic, and an eventual false flag attack perpetrated by them to justify military action in their country or countries of choice. This is their pattern. Qatar, the same country who gave Trump a $400 million jet that was approved by a prior Qatar lobbyist FARA agent, Pam Bondi, is deeply connected to FIFA. Qatar even hosted the last World Cup, and Qatar has been repeatedly called out in, this administration, but also the media. And people blame Qatar when people come for Israel. They'll be like, oh, you're not going to talk about Qatar, Tucker Carlson? So they're already kind of putting that in people's mind where it's like, Qatar's kind of bad. And Qatar has also been sanctioned for being a terrorist harboring country. So there's that as well. And we can assume that they are deliberately underfunding security operations at the World Cup due to the Senate and congressional hearings of Kristi Noem, but also because they keep saying that there's no money and they need more money. No, you don't. You guys have been allotted plenty of money. They're also saying that the DHS is underfunded and underemployed. Also not true. And mind you, politicians can lie to your face. They can lie on media outlets. There's no law against that, unfortunately. And so when they deliberately do things like this and then say, guys, terrorism is ramping up. Okay, so why are you defunding the DHS's security operations? Why are you not ramping up their operations? It just makes no sense. But then again, Kristi Noem did funnel out however many hundreds of millions of dollars out of the DHS fund. So who really knows? But I do know that they were allotted $625 million specifically for security operations for the World Cup. And they have yet to give that to the 11 host cities. In fact, Dallas, Houston, Miami, and Kansas City are still waiting for DHS to release those funds and FEMA security grants. And Congress has already approved this. And during Kristi Noem's hearing, she was saying that she needed more, and it's just not true. The money exists, it's simply not being released, and that's for a purpose. And at the same time, the DHS has been warning Americans of lone wolf terror attacks due to U.S. strikes on Iran. Interesting. So the administration is simultaneously warning of terror threats while defunding the agency meant to stop them. A major attack on American soil would justify immediate suspension of a lot of civil liberties, similar to that of what happened after 9/11. Emergency powers would bypass the courts. They do that all the time. And they also tried to strip contempt power from the court last summer, I think in July, which means that they're trying to make it so that members of the government, politicians, anybody, can take the stand and lie under oath and get away with it, contempt of court. And, that's also keeping information away. There's a few things contained within the contempt. So keep that in mind, because that is extremely serious, especially in heightened environments like this. Also, digital ID would be most likely mandated if an attack like this happened. And you can just, read between the lines. Palantir is integrated. Most AI models are integrated into the US government. The digital ID infrastructure is being built in the Children's Online Safety Act and regulations. And now, of course, if these people claim that they're doing something for a benevolent reason, like helping children, just assume they're lying. if you read the bill, it does not make sense. It's a 100% Trojan horse for some type of technocratic authoritarian implementation. And an attack would also mean that they could cause martial law to be enacted, and that would be the suspension of the 2026 midterm elections and possibly even the 2028 election, given that we don't know how long that they would play that out. And something that we should recognize, because, like I said, this is their pattern. Before 9/11 on August 6th, 2001, the president's daily briefing was titled, "Bin Laden Determined to Strike the U.S." They were warning that Al-Qaeda was trying to exploit their operatives into the U.S. to perform a terrorist attack. And apparently, that briefing was ignored, although, bin Laden was a plan from day one. But also prior to 9/11, the White House threatened to veto efforts putting more money into counterterrorism. They tried to cut funding for counterterrorism grants. They delayed arming unmanned planes that had spotted bin Laden, and they terminated a highly classified program to monitor al-Qaeda suspects in the United States. Now, why would you do that? And also, prior to 9/11, investigations, including Anthony Summers's The 11th Day, suggested that members of the Saudi royal family provided financial and logistical support to the hackers because they were Israeli. And currently, they have all of the correct people in place. They have Pete Hegseth, who doesn't even know how to do his job as the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, you clown, but you guys are anti-war? Okay, let me just close my eyes and shut my ears. Okay. And the FBI leadership has been totally replaced by Trump loyalists, as has the whole administration. Kash Patel can't even do his job on a normal day. He certainly won't be able to do it if we're faced with an extreme terrorist attack. And of course, the Department of Homeland Security's Secretary, Kristi Noem, was fired days before the World Cup security deadline. This really does all feel carefully crafted. That's going to be it for me today. I need to take a 24-hour nap before opening my laptop again. I'm so tired. But maybe I'll do a part 2, or at least some type of false flag blueprint follow-up, because there's so much more than just what we're seeing and can comment on. There's a whole nother layer of things happening behind the scene within the technology, the infrastructure that exactly mirrors what happened pre-9/11 and post-9/11. And I've actually had that written up in my notes for months now. I just haven't put it into words because it's kind of hard to explain to people, and I want to explain in a way that people can understand. But yeah, I hope you guys have a great week. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. I'm Ginger, and this is my theory.